with the release date of the Digimon trading card game being only a short few weeks away. A lot of you probably want to start preparing for the tournaments that are surely to follow. Well, BattleCore has gotten together some content creators who want to give you their thoughts, some tactics, strategies, and encouragement. We hope that these lessons will stay with you through all your challenges. And as a Digimon Tamer, there's sure to be some. Well, let's dive right in, shall we?
Hello, everybody. I am Gyrosean. I'm excited to be on this BattleCore podcast of sorts. And the crew over there asked me to just give you some of my thoughts, my opinions about learning, which I'm humbled and honored to be asked what I think about teaching anyone else how to learn the game. I'm also pretty new to it, right? Like the cards came out. And I didn't buy my first boxes until 3 days after the pre-release date. So yeah, I'm that new to it. But I have, dug in a little bit, and I have like a whole series on my YouTube channel as well with True Champion Steven, which if you're playing the game, you probably know who he is right now. So I've had the opportunity to learn from a lot of really good people and, do well in a couple of tournaments, specifically the Core TCG event that was the official one, getting top 16. So, and I come over from the Pokemon world too. Anyways, in terms of, any advice that I could give to anybody who's learning the game right now, I think the first thing that I would say to everybody is if you're getting into the game now, when this video and podcast is going to be released, take advantage of the tiny card pool in terms of learning. Dig in. Try to learn all the cards, especially the ones that have effects and abilities, because those are going to be the more complicated ones. Try to learn as many of the card pool as possible, potentially all of it to some degree, by actually playing the entirety of the card pool yourself. That's something that I did with the Crash Course series, where I just played every single color, pretty much monocolor in all those decks, aside from some level 7 white cards, but yeah, I played with every single color, and I just tried to understand broadly what does each color in this early format, what does each color try to do, generally speaking? And that's not to say that some versions of those decks may deviate, and over time that might change, obviously. But it is interesting to understand that from a game design perspective, there is a theme to every color. It's not really that much of a secret. It's not that complicated. Pretty obvious, to be honest, but actually playing with it and understanding how those decks play is good because it teaches you some nuances if you actually play with those decks, even if you don't have the best version of it, right? If you don't have Omnimon, it's still okay. Omnimon is an addition to the strategy of red or blue. But broadly speaking, most of the blue cards, if you have the rest of them, just play that. And then, you add in Omnimon when you get it. But you will understand how the card pool works. To that point, if you do start understanding every single color, the next point I was going to say actually is once you kind of understand the card pool, then you can build your own deck from what you prefer, play style-wise. And the first thing you're going to want to do is learn how to play that deck to the best of your ability. So it's a kind of myopic view initially, but take your deck and say, what is, in any given game or situation, probably the best play, generally speaking. And if you can play the deck yourself, just on your half of the equation, as best you can, that I think is the first step. Really understanding, okay, how does the deck feel when it draws? How does the deck, really ramp up into bigger Digimon, or does it prefer going wide? In doing so, when building those decks, just net deck. To be frank, just net deck. Steel decks that you see out there, I mean, as a content creator, we create deck lists because we want people to take them. And then you can take them and do whatever you want with them, right? You can adjust them to your liking, change them. The meta probably changes faster than any given deck list you'll see online is going to be really the best in the world or anything. So net deck, and then learn how to play that specific deck. And then taking those two pieces, right? Understanding the card pool and how every deck style wants to play, plus knowing how your deck wants to play. That will get you to a point in time where you're not just playing your deck, you're actually playing around and in understanding of what your opponent is going to do. And I think that's a huge part of this game. One of the best examples I can give for that is if you're playing against an Omnimon deck, and that Omnimon deck has a level 5 on the field. You may be trying to build up your board, right? And in doing so, you're like, I know this person probably has Omnimon. They may even have it in hand, especially if they're gone all the way up to a level 5. Assume that they have Omnimon, but know that, if you can try to limit them as much as possible to get into the Omnimon, then that can protect yourself. So you have two options there. You can say, I can give them enough memory to go into Omnimon, but in doing so, play an additional threat on the board. Or you can say, I'm going to give you only one memory, especially against red Omnimon. If you give them one memory, there is literally no way that you can go from a level 5 to an Omnimon on that turn. And knowing that, when you play into that and you can play around that, you can really limit what your opponent can do on their turn. Obviously, that's not always possible given what you have in hand, but that's just one example of knowing, hey, my opponent probably has this, so this is probably my best strategy. And that gets to the point of, if you understand the other decks that are out there in the card pool, those assumptions, they allow you to play around that. And I think that in any early metagame, and especially like with a lot of new players, that's going to give you a huge advantage more often than not, is if you can accurately predict what your opponent probably has in hand, but your opponent is not making those same predictions with regard to you, that is a key differentiator in terms of skill level, if you will. So that's sort of my second point there, is get to a point where you can start predicting what your opponent probably is going to do based on your knowledge of the metagame and the card pool. And then the last thing I would say, and I think this is just, everyone's going to tell you practice is important, but specifically, I would recommend that if you have locals, I say locals because I don't know how many places are actually open near you. They're not any near me really. But if you find events that are small, one that I would give an example for, because I would love people to play in this more, is the Bad Beats CCG. They have a Discord. You can look them up. But they run tournaments, and the tournaments are not heavily attended, meaning they're not like 100-person events like the Core TCG one or PPG or whatever. These giant events are really great because the prizes are cool and you can get a lot of respect for doing well in them, which is important. But small events, I think, are really important at just learning, because I find generally that at smaller events, and this is how I approach them, your opponents hopefully don't take things too seriously, because all that might be on the line is a few dollars, right? And in those scenarios, you can be a little bit more open with yeah, you can play, you're still a little competitive, but between games or in certain situations, you can just be frank with your opponent and be like, hey, I have this situation, yada, yada. And it's like an elevated learning experience rather than feeling like you're immediately in the most competitive setting and you're not allowed to ask those questions, because learning from other players is just as important. And, you can certainly play people in Tabletop Simulator or in the Discord channels, but I also just think in a slightly elevated competitive setting, but not those giant tournaments, being able to just have those conversations with your competitor and just talk things out. So that's what I would recommend. Try to find small tournaments that you can participate in that don't require an entire day's worth of your time. That honestly is how I have learned a lot, is just, meeting a couple of people in those tournaments, learning my decks that I play then. And then when I go into the big tournaments, there's not as much concern over how to play my deck or pressure, to be honest, because there's always another tournament around the corner. So that's what I have to say about learning. Hopefully it was helpful. Hopefully it's not too obvious. Probably some of it's obvious, but yeah, I will let you get over to the rest of the podcast, wherever they're putting this little interview moment in.
Hi guys, this is Joshua with BattleCore. I've been asked to give you some of my tips and thoughts on the Digimon 2020 TCG. The advice that I'm going to give you today is going to be for new players, primarily geared towards the new players. The game has not dropped yet. We're going to be getting it officially sometime next week. Ideally, as long as the Bandai timelines don't get pushed back further. So again, the tips that I'm giving to you today are going to be for new players, but veteran players who've been playing the game since the super release back in November, who's been going to the Computer Gaming Universe tournaments, who've been doing the Bandai webcam tournaments and various other webcam tournaments. You're going to be able to take this advice and kind of utilize it as well, because I'm going to try to make the advice that I give very varied so that all players should be able to at least gain something from this. That was the whole point of the series, was to be able to get some YouTube personalities to come on and let you know what some best practices are and things of that nature. So for me, the first thing I'm going to say is, please, while you have the opportunity, go into the App Store, download the Learning app, and really get your practice there. The cards are not out yet. The app does a very, very good job of explaining to you how to play the game, so that you can just jump right into it when the cards come out. It's going to teach you, how to block, what suspend is, what unsuspend is. You're going to become very familiar with the terminology that we use when we play this game. It's going to walk you through some of the key points that you need to know. So how security works, how to set the board state up, how to use the memory when turns are passed, if turns are not forcibly passed. It's going to give you all of those things and what that kind of looks like. And that really should be the first step into the game. Of course, you can always just go buy cards. There is nothing wrong with that. But the app is a great resource. We have it available to us. And so we really should be making use of every opportunity that we have in order to get the most experience possible. So again, with the app being there, with the cards coming out next week on the 29th, ideally, please use the resources that you have available to you. That's going to be my first piece of advice. We have people like Different Fight, True Champion Steven, Wazzy Plays. If you know a little bit of lesser known personalities, so people who aren't as big as True Champion, we have people like Andrew from Replay Works. We have a buddy of mine who I'm starting to get to know myself, Gyroseanplays, who used to be a Pokemon guy, and he's delving into the Digimon universe. So we have a lot of people out there, places that you can go to kind of get the information that you need to be good at the game the moment you drop into it. So again, use those resources and do what you need to do to make yourself an informed player and a better player. Outside of using the resources, the other thing that I would like to tell players is that really pay attention to how the memory gauge works and when you think you should and should not be playing cards or digivolving, or what is a safe amount of memory to leave your opponent at. So I play War Greymon Red, and a lot of problems that I find that I have with the red deck is that some of the better cards are more expensive. So your BTO1 War Greymon is going to be a 3-drop. Your Gallantmons are going to be 4 drops. Your Hardplay Volcanic Mons are going to be 11s. And of course, you'll understand this as you start to play and familiarize yourself with the game, that all megas cost roughly around that 10 to 12 mark to hard play a mega. For those of you who are watching this for the first time and aren't familiar with the terminology, when you play something, it's when you place it directly from your hand onto the table, versus when you digivolve, which is different than playing. And the Digi evolution is going to be, you have an Agumon, you want to turn it into a Greymon, and you play the Greymon on top of the Agumon. So those two things are different. The reason I bring this up is that learning how the memory gauge works is going to really help you maximize your turns once you start playing. When I started playing, I got, beat by a lot of players who were better than me. And the reason for that was that I did not understand how the memory gauge works in this game. When I come from a game like Vanguard, when you come from games like Pokemon, you don't really have a mechanic that forcibly ends your turn. In Vanguard, you choose to end your turn. Once the battle phase is concluded, you kind of dictate what you want to do there. In Pokemon, the last thing you do is attack. There really isn't anything that disrupts your turn in the midst of making plays. So if you're playing cards, you only have a little bit of memory and you overreach because you want to make a play, but you are not paying attention to the memory gauge, and your turn passes before you get to attack and things like that, then it's going to be very unfortunate. And if you continue to lose that way, it might turn you off from the game. So really delve into the memory mechanic, understand how it works, practice with it, take your cards out, shadow play, sit in front of a mirror, talk to people on Discord. There is a whole Discord server for people who play the Digimon TCG. That's not including, again, people like True Champion Steven's Discord and things of that nature. So again, first piece of advice, use the resources that are available to you in order to get better at the game. And the second piece of advice is to really delve into how that memory gauge works. My third piece of advice is going to be, don't pick a color just because you believe it is going to be strong or because the meta tells you that it is strong. The very nice thing about Digimon and the way that this game has been made is that anything can be strong if you play it properly. So, for example, I know I keep picking on True Champion Steven. He has some great crash courses, by the way, that he does with Gyroseanplays. So that's another resource that you can look into. But he played Yellow when the game first came out, and people didn't believe that Yellow was that strong on release because we had things like the Blue Omnimon, which is a very powerful deck. We had things like the Red Omnimon, which is a very powerful deck. And yet True Champion Steven was able to take a deck that people didn't think was very good because, he likes the color, and he placed in several tournaments with that color. Or we look at people like Max Tapera. From Max Tapera, went into the computer gaming universe with Green, a deck that was very underrated when, that tournament dropped, and came in first place. As far as I'm aware, completely undefeated because I was at that tournament. So any color can be good if you construct the deck in a way that fits your play style and you play it appropriately. And that's going to be my next piece of advice, is find a color that you like and focus on learning the ins and outs of that color, if it's what you want to do. Now, if you are just getting into the game, you're trying to test the grounds, you're trying to figure out what you want to do, play all the colors, go through all of them. Still a page from Gyrosean's book, still decks from other people, net deck it, figure out what they do, play it, figure out how it works. You're just getting into the game, there's nothing restricting you from trying other things, so try as many things as you feel like you need to in order to really figure out what you want to do in this game. I knew before the game dropped exactly what I wanted to accomplish, and I built my deck to accomplish that goal. And I've had success in tournaments since the game was dropped, and I failed miserably in tournaments. For those of you who watched my stream the other day for the HG Gaming tournament, I ended up dropping, 3 games because of, some misplays of my own. So even for those of us who are very knowledgeable about the game, mistakes can still be made. But I knew going into it that this is what I wanted my deck to do, and unfortunately it didn't work out this time. So that's my third piece of advice. And my final piece of advice to you guys is going to be to have fun. And I know that goes without saying, but as TCG players, I feel like we really get caught up in the this is meta, this is what's good, this is what's not, and if you're not playing what's good, that's problematic. But ultimately, we play these games to have fun, and the more that you're enjoying what you're doing, the more you're going to want to invest time in, the more you're going to want to go watch those videos by people like, Card Otaku, Card Protagonist, Different Fight, or rather his other channel is Second Fight. You're going to want to go watch those videos if you're enjoying the game. That's what's going to make you want to spend more time learning how to play the game, getting good at the game, and really involving yourself in the community. So have fun with the game. Don't get so bogged down in, I have to win. Get bogged down in, I need to have fun. I need to build the deck in a way that I feel like I can play it well, and then have fun playing the deck that you built. I play my War Greymon Red deck, and I always enjoy it every time I sit down to the table with it, even when I'm frustrated and even when I'm losing. Because ultimately my goal when I built the deck was, yes, to win, but it was to enjoy the thing that I love and that I invest my time into. So again, use the resources that you have available to you, build a deck that you like, have fun with it, Don't get so bogged down in you have to win or this is a meta pick. Experiment and just enjoy your time in the TCG. Again, this is Joshua from BattleCore, giving you some tips and strategies and ideas and ways of thinking that I think will help you in your Digimon journey. So that's going to be it for me. I don't know where this is getting placed. Hopefully I don't gotta follow someone who's ridiculously knowledgeable than me, but I feel like even if I do, there are still plenty of things that you can take away from this short segment. So thank you for your time. Go out there and be the best tamer that you can.
What's up, guys? Andrew from ReplayWorks, and I'm here for tips for new players. So this is a part of the BattleCore video that you guys are watching. I don't know, I'm kind of asked to give my opinion for some new players, but hey, BattleCore, however you want to put this in, go ahead. I'm all for it. So as new players come to the game, or if you are a new player in this game, I want you guys to keep in mind a couple of things. The first thing is don't be so stressed about some of the weird drama that goes on in the social media groups. Always remind yourself that what is around you at your regional level, at your local level, in your community level, is always the most important thing. And I say this because people on the internet, if they're not in your local community, they're not going to affect your local community. There's one thing about this game and every other card game, is that it's up to the will of the player to make this game good. Now, when I mean this, it's pretty generic, but when I mean this, it means that you yourself, as a new player, in your local community have, you guys are what's holding your local community together. Not people on the internet, you guys. So always remember that you at locals, your store owners, as long as you guys are all together at least in communication, and at least in, talking what problems there are, it'll be one of those things that kind of makes the game go longer. Could not pronounce that word, I'm sorry. But it's important because it's very easy to get dragged down the social media mud. I don't want to see that happen. It's something I always try to remind myself that anything that I wake up and see, no worries, because the people around me aren't really saying that. The people around me, in my local group at least, aren't posting about that. When I go to locals, people aren't upset that Omnimon is named Omnimon and not Megamon. No one cares about that. In New York, I can tell you that hands down. No one I've interacted with you has said, Andrew's game sucks because it's called Omni. No. Although they have been complaining that there's no waifus, but then that's a whole nother issue. Anyway, the other thing I want to bring up is it's okay to net deck. I know there's a weird stigma against it. Whatever. The reason for net decking exists so that way you can learn how to play a deck. Not because you're trying to win with the deck. Obviously, you're playing a deck that won because it's good, therefore you're going to win. That's obvious. But you should be learning that the mentality in this, and it's a healthy one, is you playing the deck to learn it. Not just to win. Winning should be coming as a byproduct of learning from the deck and learning the plays and learning the intricacies and the matchups of whatever you decide to. You see a list online, it looks cool, you want to try it out, don't let anyone stop you. It's fine. It's the only way you're going to experience different decks. By looking at what works and then getting into their mindset. Winning secondary I would say once you achieve a certain level of mastery with that deck. And that's good. You want that. You want to grow. Don't let anyone hold you back. And that goes to my next point, which is it's okay to experiment after you do this, or even before you do this, because you can look at the list and say, you know what, I don't agree with this ratio, I'm going to change it up. Feel free. But at the same time, remember that changes in the deck, ratios, how many different cards you play, everything matters, where you gotta look at yourself and say, this does not work. How do I want this to affect my strategy? And I have videos on deck analysis on my panel where we look at a deck and ask, what is your strategy? What do you want to do with the deck? How does the deck want to progress? And what cards? How do you want to evaluate cards that go in the deck? And all that matters. Where The only way you're going to know what works is by knowing what doesn't work. So by experimenting, you can run through trial and error, and you can figure out, hey, this didn't work. Let me try something else. And my last point would be to don't be afraid to mix colors, especially when in the future sets we're going to have a lot more diversity in the decks and also in the colors you can play in the deck. So it's always good right now just to get used to mixing it so you can think a little bit outside the box, especially when we're pretty limited in what we have in 1.0. But when the floodgates open at 1.5 and set 4, you want to be able to have that mindset where you're like, wait a second, I tried this out in 1.0 and it didn't work, but I have this card that works now. Oh my god. And that's what's going to help the deck be better, because you already had the experience where you didn't just shoehorn yourself into thinking, okay, I just got to play blue, nothing else can matter. Now, you can splash. Oh, you can splash Volcanic, that's in everything. But you can splash, I don't know, Puppetmon. That's a good card. But you'll never know how good it is unless you try it out. So, on that note, my name is Andrew. I'm from ReplayWorks. Thank you, BattleCore, for having me on. Catch you guys later.